This episode of Spotlight Hawaii is brought to you by Chaminade University.
Well, aloha and good morning. Thanks so much for tuning in here on this Wednesday morning. I'm Ryan Kalei-Suji, joined by Yanji Denise, and this is Spotlight Hawaii on the platforms of the Honolulu Star-Advertiser. Great to see so many of you already tuning in this morning. And Yanji, we have a very special guest, someone that we haven't talked to in some time.
That's right. He joined us when he was a candidate for Honolulu Prosecutor, and now he's been in that role for a number of months. So we've invited back Steve Alm to join us this morning. There is so much to catch up with you on, so we are so happy to see you this morning.
Nice to see you, Yunji and Ryan.
Well,
Keep up the good work.
Let's start off with the impact that COVID-19 has had on your office and just the prosecution of cases. We know that jury trials were suspended for some time. How are you proceeding with these, and how big is the backlog right now?
Well, my first task as Honolulu Prosecutor is restoring trust to that office. So it's getting it running full speed again. The deputies were all working from home when I came into office on January 4th, and we changed it that day, so they're all back in the office working on their cases. The COVID did cause really big backlogs, both in district court for misdemeanors and in circuit court for felony jury trials. And like you say, for a long time, there were no jury trials. And if there are no jury trials, you're not going to get defense attorneys wanting to plead their cases guilty, wanting to work out deals. Fortunately, the judiciary got aggressive about it, and in December started to do jury trials again.
One of the things that we saw during COVID-19 is a number of citations that were handed out, some actually being arrested for committing offenses during that time of COVID-19 when there were strict regulations on gathering sizes, about mask wearing, and the governor again recently announced yesterday more restrictions that are coming back into effect. I'm wondering if you can speak to those backlogs, those cases that you saw maybe during the pandemic, and what you're seeing now from the HPD in terms of warnings versus actual citations for those that are violating these orders by the police.
Okay. Well, before I took office in January, there were thousands of these cases, almost all of them being dismissed. And if they ended up pleading, they got like a $25, $50 fine, something like that. I think because the restrictions have been lifted and HPD is, that changed it partly, and they've taken a slightly different tack. That what we're seeing now is a lot more warnings being done. There are very few citations being issued in court. And like I said, it's being handled with a fine for that kind of thing. The Attorney General's office handled a bunch of the cases. We handle some as well. But right now, we're not seeing it. Now, as you say, if more restrictions on gatherings and stuff are put in place, that may change. So we will be monitoring that. That's all taking place in district court with our misdemeanor division.
Now, walk us through something like that, because I'm just not familiar. If somebody were to receive one of those fines, I believe at the time, it was a $5,000 fine or up to a year in jail. Let's say I violate that. I have a party, I get cited. Then what happens?
Well, if people get cited, they typically would come down and do a Zoom kind of a thing. They were trying to keep as many people out of the courthouse as possible. I believe we actually did one jury trial because of, like you say, if it's a full misdemeanor, you have the right to have a jury trial. And somebody insisted on it. And so there was a jury trial. He got convicted in the jury, for violating that. I think what the police are doing is trying to be smart about it, being judicious about it. If there are big gatherings, they should be breaking it up. And if people refuse to leave, they should get cited, because they're putting everybody at risk by doing that. But I think the practical matter is it's going to be a fine. If you do get cited, just avoid it to begin with, I think would be the best suggestion.
Earlier or moments ago, you just said one of the things that you had to do is restore order to the office. And you've taken over an office that has been marred by scandals and a federal investigation that continues. And I know you likely can't comment about the ongoing investigation, but what steps have you taken to establish that trust back into your office amid so much controversy that was left behind by the former prosecutor's office?
Well, part of it was not rehiring a number of people. We ended up replacing 14 deputies. There are about 100 in the office. And we're hiring a lot of good new ones. Honestly, it's a place that a lot of young lawyers want to work at again. because there's new management, the cloud has been lifted. One of the things we're trying to do is really do a lot of training, because you're not born with these skills. They barely touch them in law school. So we had, at the end of May, I asked the Chief Justice if we could have our deputies out of court for a week, except for custody cases we had to handle. We had a full week of trial skills training. And it was the first time there was office-wide training since 1987. So Florence Nakakuni, Flo Nakakuni, who is the U.S. Attorney 2 after me, she's head of our misdemeanor division and was a part-time judge for the last 3 years. So she's doing a great job with the new deputies. That's where most people are getting hired, at the front end. They can learn the right attitude, and it's teaching them the ethics that we're here to do justice, not just win cases. And I think that's already happening, but they got to get a lot of training and do round tables to learn more about it. We've got a lot of good deputies in the office, and we've got to encourage them and get their skill level up. But they're getting more and more chance to do jury trials. The system is slowly getting back into place that way.
How backed up is the system? I know you said that attorneys are not likely to take a plea if they know that that they've had these delays. How many cases are you looking at? And given that there is due process in this country, I would imagine that there are some people who are going to be saying, I don't have due process, I want my case dismissed.
Well, like I said, the judiciary is trying to set up a number of courtrooms to do jury trials. They have been single defendant cases. What they've been doing is using the large arraignment courts in district court, 4A and 4B, up on Alakea Street, to pick the jury so they can be socially distanced. 34 people are brought in. They pick a jury, and then they're sent off to one of the various courtrooms, either up on the 8th floor in that building or down in Circuit Court on Punchbowl Street. But even then, you're only talking about 8 jury trials, something like that, max at a time. And there are thousands of cases backlogged. They just recently did a murder case, which you need a bigger pool to choose from, because each of the attorneys get more peremptory or challenges or bumps. So it's being worked out in district court. We tried to get innovative, and Flo Nakakuni led the way, working with the defense bar, so they could handle DUIs. There was going to be a huge backlog in those cases, with a lot of those getting dismissed. We worked with MAD, we worked with the defense bar, and more than 1,500 people took advantage of a one-time offer to have their case resolved that way. And I think there are about 400 misdemeanor domestic violence cases. One of the exciting things is we're looking at every practice of this office, and we discovered that we were one of like three areas in the country, including a couple of small places in Georgia, that still had a rigid no drop policy in place for 30 years. So in doing best practices, I spoke to the National District Attorneys Association and the American Association of Prosecuting Attorneys, and we have changed our approach to be more victim-oriented, victim-centered. Now there are about 400 cases backlogged in that area, but there are trials going on every week. So the one area that has not been impacted from a backlog are juvenile offenders out in Kapolei, because there's no juries there. They can move on. So the system is crowded. We're doing our best to work on it. But what we're also trying to do, which I'm really proud of, is this office is a silo no more. We are being collaborative with all sorts of different groups, and I think it's paying dividends already.
One of the things that you had mentioned when you were a candidate for this office is that you said during an interview when you appeared on the show was that you were going to, I believe you said, take a fine-tooth comb and examine the cases handled by Catherine Kealoha to determine if there might be any corruption within the office or anything that she touched. Is that something that you have continued to pursue? And if so, have you found anything?
Yeah. Tom Brady is the first assistant, and I had hired him at the U.S. Attorney's Office. He was there for 26 years. He's the first deputy. He is leading up that investigation. That is ongoing. And in just looking around the office, that we have one office with bench warrants with files. We found some of Kathy Kealoha's files wedged in there. So we're wherever we can find it, interviewing people, following up. I'm not going to talk about anything that we may have found or not, but It's ongoing. We expect it to get wrapped up in a few months. If she as a supervisor just passed the case on to another deputy to handle and didn't get involved in it, which should be the case in most situations, then there should be no problem with it. If she was really actively involved in the case, I know a couple of cases have already been transferred over to the Attorney General's office because of that conflict. But that's an ongoing thing. It's very important that we follow through and the public knows that anything Kathy Kealoha touched is being looked at carefully.
What do you think is the biggest challenge right now for you, given that we have, the Delta variant, surging here? Do you think that jury trials will be able to continue? Are you concerned that you're going to have to face another pause when you're just starting to get a handle on this backlog? And it does sound like that's pretty substantive.
Yeah. Well, I think the leadership now, with the president, with federal workers to get vaccinated, the state and county people, and it'll be our office too. The judiciary, I think that will help to keep the jury trials going. People will still be wearing masks. There'll still be social distancing, but we got to keep the jury trials going full blast because that is the one thing that will lead to it. And we're working with the defense bar about working out cases that can get resolved. The judiciary is slowly opening up because you've got to, get drug testing going in a big way. Hope probation is tremendously successful, but it relies on drug testing with jail consequences in order to keep people sober. People don't realize the drug tests are not to catch people using, it's to keep them from using. Because if they know they're going to get a jail sanction, even a couple of days for using, they don't use. And that's really helpful. It helps them think straight. They won't get arrested for new crimes if they're able to stay sober. So we're working on every aspect of what we're doing. We're setting up Weed and Seed is something that I'm really excited about. I was involved when I was U.S. Attorney, and it's working with the community. It's basically trying to weed out crime and then seed in every thing that would help from a pro-social way, economic development, and the like. The last time we did this, I had stew and rice at Kaiulani Elementary School, so the residents could come in and I could ask them, what are your big crime problems? Because that's this, and social service gaps. Because that's one of the strategies. You ask the residents, and they said, well, you're the expert. I said, yeah, but I live in Kaimukia. I don't live here. So you tell us. Well, this time, because of COVID, we couldn't have those meetings. So I take my hat off first to Rich Wacker and the folks at American Savings Bank, then CPB, First Hawaiian, Bank of Hawaii. Together, they donated $110,000. And that paid for a survey by Anthology, one of our good researchers of businesses, residents, workers, visitors to Chinatown and Kali'ipalama. The results will be out shortly. That will help drive the seed component, particularly of Weed and Seed. But Weed and Seed has already started in Chinatown, Kali'ipalama, and it's already showing a good result. It's already cleaning up the area. And at the same time, which I'm a big believer in, is drug treatment and mental health treatment. For the chronically homeless, we're working with Department of Health to get them assessed when they're at OCCC. And then the drug treatment and mental health programs have agreed to take in the homeless. So we'll have long-term solutions for them as well.
Yeah, I want to expand a little more on the Weed and Seed program and your thoughts overall about the success that you're having. I know you mentioned just a few of those areas just moments ago, and the expansion moving outwards, because I think in the community, a lot of people are seeing these headlines of some pretty brazen attacks that are happening within the community, robberies, and other things that are hurting individuals within the community. How do you see overall that this program can not only help these specific areas, as you mentioned, Kali'ipalama, as well as Chinatown, but the larger island as a whole, as we continue to see some of these crimes throughout our island?
Well, part of it's a strategy of weeding out the crime. And that means working closely with the police department and with the judiciary so people are arrested. There are consequences right away for it. And I take my hat off to the mayor and HPD because using some of the COVID money to increase the patrols. It's great from the weeding standpoint. And then if people, get arrested, we'll deal with them in court. And we're also working with, like I said, trying to get drug treatment for the homeless, because you can put them in housing, but unless you deal with their behavioral health issues, mental health problems, drug problems, they're not going to be successful. Again, it's proof of concept. It's been 20 years since we did this. It was totally successful last time. We'll just show we can do it again, and it will work. And then it will be, the seed part never went away. So it's still active, both there in Waipahu and in Ewa Ewa Beach. The weed component needs to be added on, because the two together, weed and seed, is what really makes it work. So, but we'll go back as soon as we get it rolling here in Chinatown and Kalipalama. Then we'll go back to getting the weed going in Ewa Ewa Beach and Waipahu, and the folks in Waikiki want it to be happening there. I said we got to focus on the areas we've dealt with before, but we will certainly be looking at other areas after that, because it's more of a global strategy to try to deal with it. And Waikiki makes a lot of sense. But first, we got to show it can work here again in Kalipalama, Chinatown. And I have no doubt it will, because there's so much interest in the community about making this work and about helping out with things and helping out with seed activities and cleaning up the area. So we've already seen a change, and we've already seen a better attitude. I think if you go down and walk around Chinatown, you will already start to see it's starting to get cleaned up. And we have arrested a bunch of homeless folks for drug and alcohol problems. So we're going to get them assessed and into treatment.
I want to ask you about the Christopher Deedy case. That was something that your predecessor put a lot of resources in and was very committed to. Are you anticipating a third Deedy trial?
We are studying it right now. I'm not going to say anything now. We expect to have an announcement fairly soon on that. So, sorry.
Another.
But you mentioned the outrageous crimes. We all saw that report of the older woman walking on Baratania outside Wong's Drapery and getting assaulted by that gentleman. HPD has done a great job. He's under arrest. We're going to be charging him today. But there's a bill that passed at the legislature to provide more safety and more punishment for people who attack our seniors. We've been supporting that. I take my hat off to the legislators. They passed it. It just became law on July 1st. So he is going to be charged on that. Any assault on a person's, above 60 years of age will be a felony. So what would have been a misdemeanor in the past will now be a Class C felony. And we are putting the defense and the judge on notice. This guy should go to prison if and when he gets convicted, not put on probation, but put on prison. That kind of attack has absolutely no place in our society. And regardless of what problems he may have in his life, he needs to go to prison so other people contemplating that don't ever do it. He just attacked that woman for no reason walking on the street.
One of the things that we're seeing more and more of is officer-related shootings. In fact, there was another one that was reported just this morning. And there have been other cases that have made headlines here over the last few months. Now, you've received some criticism for the decision to bring charges against the officers involved in the Irene Mersaicab shooting. This before a criminal investigation division of the HPD's Professional Standards Office completed their investigation. How do you respond to these criticisms? And overall, on the broader perspective, how do you think the officer-related shootings moving forward should be handled?
Well, anytime you have the agency that's involved in the shooting, doing the investigation of the shooting, there are always going to be questions. Is it suspect? And this isn't a knock on HPD. They have great investigators. I'm sure they're doing a thorough job, but it can't be done. If one of the investigators in my office, who are all law enforcement officers, if they shot somebody, we would never think about doing the investigation. We'd ask HPD to do it and the state attorney general's office to bring any charges if it was appropriate. So I said it's only appropriate. We have the most experienced prosecutors who've done homicides. We have investigators. We're the right people to do an investigation. And I don't think anybody is above the law. This isn't Russia. This isn't China, where law enforcement can operate with impunity. I don't think, and I'm a huge supporter of the police department and have been for my whole 36-year career, but that doesn't mean they get a pass. Just like a prosecutor, if one of my deputy prosecutors or me violated the law, I would expect us to be held accountable. So I know I've gotten criticism, but this is what accountability looks like. That an independent view, people are going to get charged or not charged. We looked at the Miami case up in Nu'uanu. that was a legitimate shooting, a justifiable use of deadly force. We had a press conference. We announced it. HPD is going to release all the stuff. We released some of the body cam footage. In other cases, if we don't think it's a justifiable use of force, we're going to bring charges. That's my job as prosecutor. That's part of restoring trust here is you have an independent agency. I'm not scared easily. We got to be thorough and professional in doing our jobs. But this doesn't affect our working relationship with HPD. All of our cases are with them. I'm out training at the academy all the time. We're partners, standing shoulder to shoulder on everything. This is a little uncomfortable, but and I've said it would be ideal if we had a totally independent agency that was staffed with experienced prosecutors and investigators who didn't answer to me or the AG or the U.S. attorney. But no such group is on the horizon and is unlikely to be anytime soon, because where are you going to find the people really experienced in doing homicides? In my office right now. So, we are the best place right now to do it. And, it's just part of the job, and it's part of being independent and making the tough call. But that's what people elected me to do.
Well, we've seen those Back the Blue protests, and I would imagine that it would make your job harder when you have that kind of discontent and people who might not trust your office or feel like prosecutors are out to get the very people who are, on the front lines. What do you say to those? Because there have been several now that we've seen, since your decision to prosecute that case.
Well, I think the folks that are demonstrating are saying we support the police. And all power to them. I support the police too, but that's not inconsistent with charging people if they break the law. When you have 2,000 people in uniform at HPD, there are going to be some people that are going to violate the law. And I think they would like to think, the people that demonstrate, that the officers didn't do anything wrong. And, it's our job to do an investigation, to look at the body-worn camera footage and make the call whether self-defense or defense of others applied in that situation. And I don't think even the most ardent supporter of HPD who has demonstrated would think they shouldn't be held accountable, that they're above the law. They're supporting the police. I respect that. I support the police too. I don't think it's inconsistent. It's just an emotional issue. And I think no police officer has ever been charged with murder here in its history. An officer was charged with manslaughter 41 years ago, but this is the first this time has happened. And, that's just us doing our job. So if people are criticizing that, all I can say is that, I have a history. When I was U.S. attorney, we prosecuted police officers for civil rights violations, for corruption, didn't hurt our relationship with the police department. Because if people do something wrong, they know they should be held accountable. So I think it's an emotional issue. People can get upset. It doesn't mean that we're against HPD. It means we're doing our job at holding them accountable.
When you look at it as a whole on this topic of police having to use this sort of force in order to apprehend a suspect or to calm someone down or to protect themselves, I mean, there just seems to be more of these happening on a more regular basis lately than we've ever seen before. As the prosecutor, as you see these types of crimes happening in the community, I mean, what does that say about where we're at? And how do you think that we can prevent that type of force from even having to be used?
Well, I think part of it is there have always been a lot of these cases. It just didn't get the attention in the past that it does now. Because what would happen in this office is the police would finish their investigation. And on the subject of, doing it before another part of HPD finishes their investigation, that's part of being independent. And what they may be waiting for is what's called the detective's closing report. That isn't anything new. That's a compilation of other reports. So we've already looked at the other reports. When you think about it, most murder cases are charged within a week. They're arresting somebody, they're held in custody. Like, look at the Tawala case, about the young woman allegedly driving an SUV over a couple of other people in a Keamoku parking lot. That's being investigated and charged right now. So us doing an officer-involved shooting 60 days after the incident is a lot longer than virtually every other murder case that is investigated. Because when you think about it, they're holding the defendant in custody, doing the investigation so he doesn't get out, and then 2 or 3 days later charging him with it. So the practice in this office would be to wait for HPD to finish their reports, finally send it over. Often took more than a year. Then they would look at it, and in all cases decline. But there was something like 23 officer-involved fatal shootings in the last 10 years. And then this office would send a letter to the police chief declining the case and giving the reasons why. I just thought that was unacceptable. And we have to do an independent investigation, and that means interviewing people if need be, re-interviewing if need be, looking at body cam footage, looking at surveillance footage, and making an independent call. And we try to do it 60 to 90 days after an incident. And that's what we've been holding to so far, and we'll try to keep doing that.
I know we're almost out of time, but I wanted to ask you if you could sort of speak to the broader trends that you're seeing. You know, we hear of different cases like the ones we've been talking about that get a lot of attention in the news, but on a broader perspective, what kind of crime are you seeing? I think there was a lot of concern given the economic uncertainty that COVID brought, with so many people losing their jobs and perhaps losing their residence. What are you seeing just in terms of broad strokes of what kind of crime is happening, and what are the trends that you have identified?
Well, one of the challenges is during COVID, crime was down like 30%. And that makes sense because overall crime, because if a business is shuttered, there's no shoplifting, right? If people aren't out and about and doing things, you're not going to have certain types of crime. So during the campaign and now, it was talking about the fact that as things open up, we are going to see more of those, all types of crimes. And people may feel like, wow, it's really out of control. And I hate to use the word normal, but it would, part of this is just going back to pre-COVID crime rates. And we'll have to see, because things dropped considerably during COVID. There were more people at home all the time, so burglaries were down. I think if there was a burglary, it might have ended up as a home invasion because people were there. Of course, my biggest concern is violent crime. That's who we need to work with the police department, try to increase the number of cases that get cleared. I was really happy. HPD has some crack investigators, and both after the crime. So like, for instance, there was the guys in the motorcycle outfit that broke into the Marshall Fields, I believe, jewelry store down at Restaurant Row. Well, with use of DNA and looking at, they tied those folks into a home invasion robbery months earlier. And so we've charged both of them. They're sitting in custody waiting for trials. We will work with the police on trying to really hold and send to prison the violent crime, people committing violent crime. Because as a judge, I was the toughest sentencer in the courthouse. And I fully expect and will hope my colleagues would send the really violent and dangerous, the ones who won't stop stealing, to prison. I'm a big believer in probation. So if they don't fit that category, we want them succeeding on probation because we all win. But I'm concerned about all sorts of crimes. I'm concerned about domestic violence, which is when people are cooped up that way. And that's partly why we've changed our approach to it, to listen to the victims more. We're also going to be doing more sex trafficking cases because this office wasn't very active in actually doing a lot of those cases. And we're trying to work with Susanna Wesley, Ho'ola Napua. HPD is assigned a full-time detective to work on these cases. And we're trying to, send pimps to prison, basically, so they don't want to work out of Hawaii. But as the economy opens up more, especially in Waikiki, that's often a hot spot for sex trafficking. So we'll be trying to work on that. But it's trying to work on as much as we can. We've also increased white collar from 1.5 deputies to 4 deputies because we know how serious that is and can be kind of hidden. And those people hurt people, very badly when they steal from them. So we're trying to cover a lot of bases, but I think by getting our deputies trained up and working with HPD even more closely, we can try to affect the crime rate.
Well, it sure sounds like you have your hands full. A lot of things that are happening there in your office, and we appreciate you taking half an hour out of your day in what sounds like a busy day to address some of these issues and answer some of these questions. So thank you so much, Honolulu Prosecutor Steve Alm, for joining us here this morning.
Thank you both. Talk to you later
Thank
next
you.
time.
Aloha. Thank you.
Great to hear from him, and we covered so much ground. I was really had forgotten about his pledge when it came to the cases that had been touched by Catherine Kealoha, and he has assigned someone to deal with that exclusively. And he said that basically her files are all over the place, and they're trying to find each and every one. So that was very interesting to hear. Also, on the subject of that backlog, just that they had months and months without any jury trials, and so they're trying very hard to catch up, but they have to, maintain their own COVID protocols. And it does sound like that is a slow process right now.
Yeah, and one that he hopes will not be hindered by what's happening with the Delta variant and any other restrictions that may be happening. He's saying that these judiciary systems and courts need to continue to happen, that trials need to be able to continue in order to chip away at that backlog. And while dealing with all of that, simultaneously trying to really start up and reestablish that weed and seed program that he found success with earlier in his career, trying to reestablish that back in the Kalihi, Palama, and Chinatown districts. We know that Mayor Blangiardi has also spoken publicly about his commitment to the program and to helping to restore the Chinatown area. You heard the prosecutor saying that that is the area that they want to focus on because they know they've had success, and hopefully when they see that success, they can then carry that model to other areas of the island that also will need it, areas like Eva Beach and in Waikiki, but really focusing their efforts at this point in time on those areas that he mentioned during this interview.
That's right. And he also talked about the case that we've seen just in the last few days with the man on South Baratania Street shoving that elderly woman, knocking her down to the ground. He said that under a newly passed law, that person will be prosecuted as a felony as opposed to a misdemeanor, which would likely result in some serious jail time. There's no tolerance for that kind of crime in our community. So that was encouraging to hear because I know so many people were so upset by that. He didn't tell us whether or not he's doing a third Deedy trial. I think a lot of people will be interested in that just because the office had committed so many financial resources to pursuing the first two cases that did not go their way. So we'll have to wait and see on that. He said an announcement is expected, but he didn't want to make it here today.
Yeah, you tried, Yanji, but unfortunately, we did not break that news here today. But great hearing from him. I could have talked about a lot more things that our community is dealing with and things that his office is directly working with. Unfortunately, we ran out of time. If you missed any portion of the interview, we encourage you to go back and watch this. You can also catch the rebroadcast on KKI Channel 50 every night at 6:30, or also find us on a podcast. But we're looking forward to our conversation on Friday, where we'll be focusing on our schools.
That's right. Superintendent Keith Hayashi is going to be joining us. We know that so many of you are parents or have, our aunties or uncles or grandparents and are concerned about the keiki in your lives. Over 160,000 returning to school last week. And we've seen over 100 cases of COVID identified throughout the state in children or related to campuses. So what does that mean? What are they seeing this week? Also going to be talking about the decision to mandate that student athletes who want to participate in sports and who are eligible for the vaccine get one. We've seen big protests here on Oahu, along with on some of the neighbor islands, from parents who feel like they should not have forced vaccinations there. So we'll be asking him about that decision. A lot to talk about. We are so happy that kids get to go back to school in person, but is it safe? I think a lot of parents will have some questions for Keith Hayashi.
Yeah, looking forward to that conversation. We invite you to join us once again here on Friday at 10:30 for that episode of Spotlight Hawaii. Until then, stay safe and aloha.
Aloha.
This episode of Spotlight Hawaii was brought to you by Chaminade University.